Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. In today's times, social media has become everybody's favorite punching bag. Social media is held up as the reason why we have political polarization, electoral manipulation, undesirable behavioral shifts in the society, increased violence, and so on. In fact, social media has also been described as a threat to human rights, freedom, individuality, and democracy itself. And also, we have not shied away from pinpointing the culprits behind unleashing this evil social media upon the world. And we have blamed the design of the social media apps, which enables creation of echo chambers, which enables creation of virality of information in a very short period of time. And we've also blamed the usual suspects of big tech monopolies who run massive advertisement services on social media and who also run the algorithms and recommendation engines which influence what you see on your favorite social media app. Today's guest and my colleague at Takshashila, Pranay Kotistane, however, has a very different question to ask. The question is, what are the meta mechanisms that actually make social media a very powerful instrument in society today? Welcome to ATP, Pranay.
Thanks, Shri. Good to be back here.
Yes. So, Pranay, before we talk of the three meta mechanisms that I think you've also written about previously, let me pose you a very simple meta question. It's a meta question and simple question at the same time. So social media was, supposed to be this free marketplace of ideas, democratic platform where each individual had their voice. There were no gatekeepers, a place where people could build virtual communities and share their love, affection, interests, cat pics, dog pics, and whatnot. But today, social media has been characterized as this big evil. So what do you think went wrong?
Yeah, I think that everyone's grappling with that, right? Actually, there was this great euphoria in the early days, right? That connecting people from anywhere to anywhere is a great idea and that will lead to many great things. That was the underlying assumption. But I guess that assumption has been belied over the last few years, and we now know there are other variables that come in. Maybe context is required for people to comment in, or also the fact that there is utility to people having expert opinions commenting on these issues instead of just having everyone and anyone take a call on anything and everything and then giving equal weightage to a view of a person who knows nothing about it but has good writing skills or can provoke someone versus relying on someone who is an expert on this, right? So earlier there was this euphoria that just the fact that we'll have everyone talking to everyone else will actually lead to better outcomes. But now I think people have realized that that might not be the best way. You still need people who are deeply interested in an issue, have great knowledge about that issue, and also whose stakes are high on an issue. Their views should have more weightage than the people who can just get up in the morning and tweet about a issue, right? So these are things that are sort of coming to the fore, and it's not the first time, right? It often happens when you have a new information discontinuity, right? Just like how printing press did many things, there was European nationalism arising out of it, some arguments go. So there are massive changes which happen when the structure of communicating information changes, and that's what happened over the last 20-30 years, and our underlying assumptions about what that could do or have also now changed over the last 2-3 decades.
That's right. So like recently I came across a newspaper piece which spoke about how, majority of Indians who receive WhatsApp news actually trust the news that they receive. And
Right.
the fact that, there is this informational discontinuity, as you said, I think there is a gap where, people, I don't know if eventually they will or not, but they will have to figure out that, you cannot trust everything that you read on internet. It is as basic as that. And a lot of people still have failed to do that.
Correct, correct. Yeah, but Sri, also, it's a sudden thing which happened, and all of us are grappling, what has happened, how much should we rely, etc. But I don't know if you've observed this in my groups that I have been a part of, the behavior which used to be there earlier, right? Like some forward you will receive, and people keep sharing that forward again and again without thinking, has sort of subsided, at least in an anecdotal point of view. And I don't see those kinds of things being forwarded, and even if they do, people put it very tentatively, saying that, I got this, I don't know whether it's true, but can you check, I'll just share it in any case. So that I see as evidence that people are getting somewhat more skeptical of the things that they see. Is that your experience as well?
I think so. And I personally have pushed back on some of the, viral forwards on my family WhatsApp groups. I mean, I've
Okay,
pointed
you
out.
are that guy who everyone
Yeah.
hates.
Yeah. And no, it has been so funny sometimes because, there was a message which said particular political party MLAs did this. And when I said no, it was B, the person who sent this replied that, oh, sorry, I never checked the video. I just forwarded it.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of blind forwarding which is going on.
Yeah. No,
And
what you did was very important, right? What you actually did is called breaking an information cascade. And there's a lot of literature on this as well. So when someone starts forwarding things, etc., there's an information cascade which forms. So the next person who forms the view would not apply their mind. They'll just think on the same lines that party A has did it, just because someone else is saying that, and if it falls into their confirmation bias, it will even strengthen that view. So what you did was actually break that information cascade and question it, right? And if you do that early enough in an information cascade cycle, some of these things crumble very easily, So I'm sure after your intervention, others would have, that topic would have died down and something else would have happened.
exactly. And the
Mm,
other thing is that sometimes news comes with disclaimer sort of, which says that shocking if true, right?
mm,
So they're not really saying this is true or this is verified information, but if it is, they're signaling that
mm.
this is shocking or undesirable. But actually, what you
Right.
said about, if someone pushing back just makes the others a little bit more wary about posting the next message, that
Mm,
actually brings me to the first instrument of power of social media that you have spoken about, right? Which is
mm,
reference networks. That our behavior is sort of driven by the reference networks that we have. So, could you just
mm.
elaborate on this? And maybe you could begin by telling our listeners what is a reference network and how it plays out in social media.
Right. So the three meta mechanisms I feel we need to appreciate to understand social media's power are reference network expansion, Overton window expansion, and disproportional rewards expansion. So these are sort of the three expansions, you can call it, in Chinese Communist Party style. But let's go to the first expansion, right? So the first expansion I was talking about is reference network, and this term comes from social norms literature and behavioral science literature. What it essentially means is a reference network comprises people whose beliefs and behaviors matter for our behavior. So people in your family, people whom you considered as quote unquote us, are some people who influence your own behavior, right? So some of our behavior is interdependent. We don't do things just because we want to, but it is shaped by what others do, right? So that's what reference networks are, and reference networks have been a part of humanity since the beginning, right? But what used to happen is generally these reference networks were geographically proximate, in nature. So a large amount of our behavior, which is interdependent, is shaped by people who are around us, people in schools, people whom we meet, people in our families, etc., right? So they influence our behavior in a large way. Now with TV, radios, books and newspapers, you had new horizontal comradeship, so you had new imagined communities, but still the impact of these was not as big as our geographically proximate reference network, right? So they were still important, but social media changes that, so this is my proposition, and I would love to hear from our listeners if they disagree. But my contention is that social media has expanded our reference networks like never before. So people across the world now can influence our perceptions, instantly and repeatedly. That's a big change, and they can do that instantly in the sense that when an event is still unfolding, they can do that, and repeatedly in the sense that they are always there in your feed, you're constantly interacting with them. So there is a behavioral change which happens over and over again because of that interaction, right? So that is one way to think of it. So in these reference networks, right, a lot of people mistake this just for echo chamberization, but in my view echo chambers are just one subset of reference network expansion. So basically this reference network will expand when an individual associates herself with a new set of individuals, right? So that new is important, and that association according to me could be of two types. One is sort of comparative and one is preferential. So, in a comparative association, we compare ourselves with others whom we imagine to be similar to us. And social media, anyways, expands the number of people whom we can compare ourselves with, right? So now you know someone who's in some other country, but you think that they are similar to us in some other respect, and you're constantly comparing yourself with them. So that sort of expands your reference network. What they do, what they post influences your thinking and behavior as well, right? And in the second one, the preferential type, the focal point is really preferences. So our behavior is determined by the likes and dislikes of others we encounter on social media, right? So I have a framework on this which I'll just talk about. So in the comparative reference network association, right, so I said like there are two mechanisms that can operate. One mechanism can be that others who are like me seem to be getting a better deal. So if that is sort of the mechanism and your association, then that has a impact on an individual behavior, in the sense that either you can be inspired or you will feel a sense of relative deprivation, right? So you will see that others who are just like me are getting a better deal with me than me. So that can either influence my behavior in the direction of inspiring me, or it can actually lead me to think, I am this person who's been discriminated against. So that is one way. The other comparative association could be that others who are like me are actually getting a worse deal. So when that happens, our behavior could be that you want to sort of show support in various ways. You want to actually help the person whom you associate yourself, they are in your reference network, but you think that they're getting a worse deal. Or another way it could play out is you actually puts you in a despondence type of situation where you feel that nothing's going to change because people are getting worse deal in spite of their effort or in spite of the work that they have put in. So that's how comparative association operates. Preferential association has four mechanisms, I thought. So one is, for example, one mechanism could be others hate what I like. So when that sort of association is developed, the behavior could be that we start hating what others like, or we disconnect from the others who are people who hate what I like, right? So I completely disconnect from them, or we gang up with those who hate the haters, right? So that could be a third behavior. And I'm not going into examples because I'm sure you listeners will be able to associate with some of these on their daily day-to-day lives on social media. The second preferential mechanism could be others like what I like, right? So in that way you can reinforce each other's views. That would be the individual behavior. The third one would be others hate what I hate, right? So then again you can reinforce each other's views or gang up against the others object of common hatred. So if you see, echo chambers are actually these two subsets of preferential mechanism, right? So when you have others like what I like and others hate what I hate, that is what you call echo chambers. But I have given you about other mechanisms where you have reference network expansions which are not just of the echo chamber type. And the final one is others like what I hate, right? So then you start liking what the others hate, or you disconnect from so-called others, or you gang up with those who hate the likers. So these are sort of various ways in which reference network expansion can operate in social media. And all that is possible now because of the large number of people you are in touch with, you are in contact with, you are seeing their views on an instant and repeated basis. So that's one expansion that I think is fundamental to understanding why social media is powerful. What do you think, Sri?
Yeah, I was just trying to sort of think of real life examples of, how these reference networks have operated. And one which instantly comes to my mind is, the global solidarity which Ukraine received on
Hmm.
social media from, citizens across different countries in the world. And this was
Yeah.
instant in the sense like the war broke out, and in a few weeks, you have like Ukrainian flags on Twitter handles everywhere, right? And there I realized there is something which social media can do, right? Which is
Hmm.
like it's not just an echo chamber, but create a reference network where you're looking at everybody in the world who are sort of disagreeable with Russia's actions, and now you all come together to express solidarity. right? And I'm sure this can
Yeah.
play out in ways which are not exactly desirable, creating extremist groups or far left, far right, something like that.
Yeah.
So, yes,
Yeah.
the potential of referring network, as you said, is immense.
Right. Yeah. As you rightly said, it could go both ways. Another way I put it is that basically what a expanded reference network does is that no issue in this world which is now local. Any local issue can become global by default. That should be our assumption. Because you can actually instantly and repeatedly intervene in an ongoing debate, right? So a classic case of that is even farm laws debate, right? It was not just being discussed in Delhi. Everyone within India and people even outside India were stakeholders in this in a way, right? They were intervening or they were commenting on it or even shaping the discourse to an extent. So that's why I think reference network expansion is a very different kind of a beast which makes social media powerful.
And I've read in commentary on social media that it has enabled creation of multiple realities, right? For example,
Hmm.
when you have a close reference network of your, immediate friends, colleagues, family, then you occupy a similar reality. Now, my brother who lives across the room can
Hmm.
occupy a very different reality thanks to social media because he has a very expanded reference network, right?
Hmm.
And same goes for my colleagues, and same goes for
Right.
my family members. So that I
Hmm.
think is an offshoot of this expansion. Maybe this whole idea of multiple realities, which some people tend to criticize immediately, has a deeper
Hmm.
cause.
Correct, correct. Yeah, I think the reason for that multiple realities is because of a difference in our reference networks, right? That could
Yeah.
be one way.
So let's
Right.
take a
All right.
short break now. Yeah, and then we'll come back and we'll continue the conversation and we'll discuss Overton window and disproportionate rewards for extremity. Welcome back. So we were discussing the reference network expansion in social media, which has made social media a very powerful instrument in modern day and age. But Pranay also mentioned that there are two other mechanisms which has enabled, the concentration of power in social media. And one of them is Overton window. So Pranay, would you like to take us through what Overton window means and how it has expanded thanks to social media and what are the pitfalls of this expansion?
Yeah. So again, the Overton window is a framework that comes from political science literature. So what it simply says is that for any political issue, the range of socially acceptable positions is narrower than the range of all possible positions, right? So it's intuitive in a sense that politicians would not want to reflect any ideas that are radical or unthinkable, not acceptable in society. So they'll stick to a narrower range of positions which are socially acceptable, which are mainstream, uncontroversial, etc., right? So this is what you call ideas of this nature, which are popular, sensible, uncontroversial, are said to be within the Overton window. So the key insight from this literature is that actually you can move Overton window over time. So maybe if people keep talking about the unthinkable over and over again, Overton window can move over time, right? So in either direction. So that is one way to think of Overton window. But with social media, the important thing is that the Overton window is not just moving in other direction, but it has been stretched with the use of social media. And what it means by stretching is that nearly all possible positions on any issue have become socially acceptable, right? So earlier there used to be this filter, right? People would not talk about certain things, certain ideas because they are either too incendiary or they are, very provocative. There were some filters which operated, but now there are no such filters. There can be conspiracies of all sorts. There can also be unthinkable arguments which actually think laterally about an issue in the right way. But it's just that Overton window has been stretched like never before. And earlier, when you had these older institutions which exuded authority, right? So you had gatekeepers in the form of newspapers or others who would bring that Overton window to a narrow limit, have now sort of lost that power. So Overton window has been expanded, and that leads to many interesting consequences, right? So when you combine that with the fact that each of these views attracts a new reference network, what it means is that Overton window of social acceptability itself gets stretched, decentralized, so there are people of all sorts of opinion, of all hues, who have a following, who have their own reference network. So that leads to a difficult position. I'll give you an example where it actually led to a positive thing, right? So we know the negative part, so I don't want to discuss that. But actually, if you see the positive part, the drastic group, right, the decentralized radical autonomous search team investigating COVID-19, it was a group of people who were formed on social media, and they were the people who were contesting the origin of the COVID-19 dominant hypothesis, which was that it didn't happen in Wuhan, etc. And they actually changed the conversation on that, and then even the US and other international organizations were forced to relook at the previous assumptions. So maybe they were wrong ultimately, but the fact that they had enough power, they expanded the Overton window, they brought a view which was unthinkable into something which was acceptable, which was discussed by governments and international organizations, shows you the power of what social media has done. What do you think?
Yeah, like you said, I think the problem isn't so much of shifting of Overton window, because if we look at like recent contemporary history also, I think with every generation there is a gradual shift in Overton window, right? Like ideas which are not previously acceptable become more acceptable. Some things which were the norm
Hmm.
cease to be norms, and this has very positive benefits for the society. Like civil rights develop over time, gender rights get recognition, LGBTQ rights get recognition, and so on. So a gradual shifting of Overton window is probably desirable for the society. But like you said, the problem now is in the stretching of it from both ends, I think from all ends, right? And you
Hmm.
do not know when it is going to break. And if that is the case, what scares me honestly is we are looking at a very deep fragmentation of the society that we live in. Do you see such a fear come true, or do you have a more hopeful position on this?
Yeah, in the short term, yes, this people call it affective polarization, right? That's what it has happened. There are views all along the Overton window, and there is followership and teams who are against each other all along this Overton window. So there are tensions in between all of them. But as I said, the hope for me comes from the fact that this is a big discontinuity. We are figuring out things, and with time maybe we will realize that these things are more harmful in some ways, and our behavior will change. So this is just a vague hope actually, but at least from an anecdotal sense, when I see people being more circumspect of the news that they were spreading earlier, it is sort of some indication that we are rethinking what we talk about.
Yeah. I think social media awareness is at least building up, but I think the scale of expansion of social media is such that it might take, much, much longer than it is desirable. But since you mentioned now that this Overton window is being stretched to the extremes, and this actually becomes a race to the bottom, right? Eventually, that brings me to the third mechanism of disproportional rewards for extremity in social media, right? So this
Yeah.
seems to suggest that in fact social media incentivizes this behavior, that your bad behavior gets instantly recognized and rewarded. So you like to elaborate on that aspect as well?
Yeah, so a lot of reasons are given for polarization. Sometimes people say skewed algorithms and incentives arising out of advertisement based models lead social media to promote things which are more incendiary in nature, right? So that is definitely one reason for it, but there's a lot of ongoing study on it on both sides. So on certain social media, like on YouTube, this view has been contested. A lot of people think that even if the algorithm were to be different, actually people are seeking that kind of content, so it's not as if you change YouTube algorithm things will be solved. So what I think is probably there's a deeper reason for why we like in extreme content, and that I think is information overload. Now what happens is, see, in the information age, persuasion is a key power, and persuading anyone requires attracting someone's attention. But since attention is a scarce commodity in a really crowded information environment, how else do you gain someone's attention? The only way to attract it is to come up with something which is really surprising, shocking, out of the blue, which makes you take notice immediately, right? So in that sense, even if you were to change algorithmic, like you just shift Twitter to, for example, the latest tweet option, and not the feed is just switched to latest tweets, still you would then follow people who would probably come up with something surprising, shocking, in order to be in this information so that it captures your attention, right? And even people who are in your network would try to do things which are of this kind. So with that sense, what I think is, because of the information overload, what will eventually happen is that this idea of going towards more extreme, shocking, surprising views is baked into any of these systems, and that's why, for example, if there's something which talks about an airplane which landed on time, will never carry enough news or recognition, because it carries less information, right? It's not telling you anything that you don't know it. But something which tells you, let's say, an airplane crash, obviously has very high information because it is shocking or surprising, right? So these are the kinds of things which gain more virality, visibility, and that is going to be there over time. So over time, not just that the Overton window expands, it also becomes broader at the two poles, is how I am imagining. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a even more scarier proposition when I picture it mentally, that it is becoming broader at the poles. But yeah, so I think the point you're making is, sensationalization has a reason.
Hmm.
We have spoken a lot, at least I have thought a lot about this in the context of TV media, at least, that, there is so much sensationalized. 9 p.m. news is all like that, some 10 breaking news images shouting at you.
Yeah.
And, you have these hyperbolic
Hmm.
anchors shouting at the top of their voice
But
and
don't you
whatnot.
think that has changed now, Sri? Like over the last 2-3 years, even that has mellowed down, no?
Has it? Because I don't know. I think I stopped watching TV at the
Yeah.
peak of all this.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm happy to hear that it has changed. But yeah, like sensationalization could be an effect of information overload. Yeah, there's a lot to think about, definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, these were the three propositions I have, and yeah, I'm sure there will be many more of these. But I thought it's important to take a step back and think of the meta mechanisms rather than going into one particular social media and saying what is happening within it. There's of course value in it, but there's a lot to do from a human behavioral point of view that we need to uncover to understand the reasons.
Can you think of any social media platform which has sort of used insights from these mechanisms that you mentioned to sort of change their, user experience or something like that?
Yeah, I think they are trying many of these things, right? So now, for example, on some social media, you don't have infinite scroll, right? Or
Mm.
they'll also try to change the reference network to don't associate with the most extremist view. So these kinds of things are being tried, but again, yeah, these are all in the nascent stage, and we don't have much visibility into what is exactly being done and why. At least I don't. So
Mm.
yeah, have you observed?
No, not really. I think one of the things which Twitter did was downvoting replies.
Mm,
So
mm.
that came as a small nudge where, if a reply does not making sense to the main content of the
Mm.
tweet, then, the audience can downvote it and this won't show up as an immediate reply. So
Yeah,
this will
the
sort of,
latest tweets feed is also another example, right? Where you can now more easily switch in the UI to latest tweets instead of the tweets that the Twitter algorithm throws at you.
yeah, yeah. So, but I don't know. These seems like small fixes against the
Mm.
big problem of human behavior and how to change it. But thank you so much, Pranay, for being with me on this podcast. And I'm sure our listeners have a lot to take away from the three different mechanisms of power concentration in social media that you discussed. And hopefully, some of our listeners will come up with the innovative solutions which will alter human behavior in social media and take it back, I don't know, 15, 20 years when it was a happy go lucky place. So, thank you once again, Pranay.
Thanks, Sri.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.